The man who tore her from the stagecoach wasn't just a common bandit. He was Gideon Malachi, a name spoken in whispers, a ghost of the high desert. But as his cold eyes scanned her face, he wasn't looking at a prize. He was looking at a prophecy. He didn't demand the mail safe or the passenger's jewels. He pointed one steady finger at her, Rowena Pierce, and said the words that would shatter her world. She's the one. Take her. Her capture wasn't about ransom. It was about a destiny she never knew existed, one that was about to be paid in blood and secrets. The world was a canvas of dust and shimmering heat. Rowena Pierce, her grey travelling suit already powdered with the grit of the Arizona Territory, stared out the stagecoach window, trying to reconcile the jagged, brutal beauty of the land with the genteel life she had been sent to inherit. She was bound for Prescott, where a man she barely knew, Mr. Howard Winslow, awaited her. Theirs was a match arranged by families, a merging of Eastern money and Western opportunity. Rowena, practical and educated, saw it as a duty, not a romance. She clutched the small, heavy locket at her throat, a familiar gesture of self-preservation. It was the only thing she had left of her father, Leland Pierce, a man of maps and books who had vanished into this very wilderness a decade prior, chasing theories of lost canyons and ancient civilizations. "Dust plume, northwest!" The shout came from Walt, the driver, his voice cracking with a sudden, sharp fear. Rowena's fellow passengers, a portly whiskey drummer named Mr. Deaver, and a rail-thin preacher, Reverend Bligh, jerked upright. The stagecoach lurched, the horses screaming as the crack of rifles split the air. It wasn't a warning shot, it was a command. Bullets splintered the wooden frame by Rowena's head. Mr. Deaver yelped and fumbled for a pistol he clearly didn't know how to use. Then they were surrounded. They were not the usual ragged bandits. These men moved with the drilled precision of soldiers, their horses fanning out, cutting off any hope of escape. They were led by a man who sat his black stallion, not just as a rider, but as a king surveying his domain. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked carved from the same red rock that surrounded them. His dark hair was long, tied back with a leather thong, and his eyes, even from 20 yards, seemed to burn. He wore a long duster, and the gun belt at his hips was practical, not flashy. He was, Rowena realized with a cold spike of terror, Gideon Malachi. The name was legend. Not just a thief, but a chief. They said he ruled a hidden kingdom in the canyons, a refuge for men running from the noose and the law. They said he was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly without mercy. The coach slid to a halt. Walt, the driver, had his hands high. "We ain't carrying no strong box, Malachi. Nothing but passengers and mail." Gideon Malachi dismounted, his boots landing softly in the dust. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was more menacing than any sudden motion. He ignored Walt. He ignored the terrified preacher and the sweating drummer. His gaze went straight to the window, straight to Rowena. He walked to the door and pulled it open. Rowena flinched, pressing herself against the opposite seat. "Get out," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that vibrated through her. "Please," Reverend Bligh stammered. "Take our money, sir, but spare the lady. Spare us all, in the name of God." Malachi's gaze didn't waver from Rowena. "I am not interested in your money, preacher, and your God has no jurisdiction here." He reached a hand in. Not a rough grab, but an offering, a terrifying, absolute command. Rowena stared at the calloused, sun-baked hand. She knew, with chilling certainty, that refusing it would be a fatal mistake. She placed her trembling hand in his, and he drew her out of the coach. He stood close, his height and presence a physical weight. He studied her face, his expression unreadable. He scanned her features, her dark, wind-whipped hair, her mouth set in a line of defiance, and her eyes a deep, stormy grey. It was her eyes that made him pause. He inhaled sharply. "It's you," he whispered, a sound of such profound, raw astonishment that it cut through her fear. "After all this time, it's really you." Rowena had no idea what he meant. I am Rowena Pierce. My fiancé is Howard Winslow of Prescott. He will pay a handsome ransom. Name your price." A shadow of a smile, cold and humorless, touched Malachi's lips. "Your fiancé," he said, the word tasting like an insult, "cannot offer me anything I want." He turned to one of his men, a rough-looking rider with a scarred face. "Corbett, tie up the driver and the passengers. Take the mailbags. We'll make it look like a standard robbery. But leave them the horses. I don't want them dying of thirst. Not yet." "And the woman, Chief?" Corbett asked. Gideon Malachi looked back at Rowena, the intensity of his gaze making her feel stripped bare. "She's the one," he said, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Take her." He lifted her onto his own stallion, mounting behind her and pinning her against his chest. Mr. Deaver fainted. Reverend Bligh began to pray loudly. "What are you doing?" Rowena cried, twisting against the iron grip of his arm. "I told you, you will be paid." "This isn't about money, Miss Pierce," Gideon Malachi rumbled, his breath warm against her ear. "Some things are worth more than gold. Some things are a matter of destiny." As the horse surged forward, carrying her away from the plundered stagecoach and the life she knew, Rowena Pierce looked back at the disappearing figures of her fellow travelers. She was no longer a passenger on her way to a simple, arranged life. She was a captive, stolen by an outlaw chief for a reason she could not fathom. The high, lonely canyons swallowed them whole, and her silent scream was lost in the thundering of hooves. The journey was a brutal, waking nightmare. They rode for hours, pushing deep into a maze of red rock and switchbacks that Rowena knew she could never navigate alone. Gideon never spoke. He held her firm against him, an inescapable wall of muscle and leather. The land grew more imposing, the canyons narrowing, until she felt the world was closing in. Just when she thought the path was a dead end, a rock wall blocking their way, Gideon let out a sharp, bird-like whistle. A section of the rock wall, which Rowena now saw was a cleverly disguised, massive wooden gate, swung open. They rode into a place that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't a camp. It was a town. Malachi's Rest, as she would learn it was called, was built into the canyon itself. Stone houses were carved from the cliffs, connected by rope bridges and narrow winding stairs. Water from a high spring cascaded down a series of channels, feeding patches of green, corn, squash, and fruit trees that flourished in the protected bowl of the canyon. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. This was no temporary hideout. This was a permanent, fortified settlement. Men, women, and even children paused in their work to watch them ride in. Their faces were not welcoming. They were hard, wary, and intensely curious. Rowena saw the brand of the outlaw on many of them, but she also saw families. It was a disorienting, terrifying paradox. Gideon finally dismounted, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. His second-in-command, the man named Corbett, sneered at her. "So this is her, Chief. This is the one." "Mind your tongue, Corbett," Gideon said, his voice quiet, but carrying a lethal edge. "Get back to your post, and send Barnaby to me." Corbett's eyes narrowed, but he obeyed. Gideon turned to Rowena. "You will not be harmed, so long as you do not try to harm anyone. You are my guest." "I am your prisoner," Rowena spat, her voice shaking with rage and exhaustion. "The two are not mutually exclusive," he replied. He led her to a small, clean cabin, set slightly apart from the others. It was simple, but not a cell. There was a bed with a clean quilt, a small stove, a table, and a shelf of books. "This will be yours." "Why?" she demanded, spinning to face him. "Why me?" "What do you want?" Before he could answer, a man with a kind, wrinkled face and a noticeable limp entered. He had a patch over one eye. "You called, Gideon." "Patch, this is Rowena Pierce. She will be staying with us. See that she has food, water, and whatever else she needs. She is not to be bothered. She is under my protection." The man, Barnaby Patch Greer, looked from Gideon to Rowena, his one good eye full of 1,000 unasked questions. But he nodded. "As you say, Chief." Gideon's gaze lingered on Rowena. "We will talk tonight," he said. And then he was gone. The afternoon was a blur. Patch brought her a tray with stew and fresh bread. He was polite, almost gentle, but his presence was a constant reminder she was guarded. She tried the door. It was not locked. But she looked outside and saw 2 armed men standing 100 yards away, watching her cabin. A gilded cage. True to his word, Gideon returned as the sun painted the canyon walls in deep shades of crimson. He entered without knocking, carrying a lantern that cast flickering shadows across his hard features. "You've eaten?" he observed, noting the empty tray. "Answer me," Rowena said, backing against the far wall. "What is this destiny you spoke of? Why did you take me?" Gideon set the lantern on the table. He didn't approach her, but his presence filled the small room. He looked tired. The iron-clad chief, who had ripped her from her life, now looked like a man shouldering a heavy burden. "My mother," he began, his voice low, "was not a common woman. She was born in the old country, and she had the sight. She saw things, not in a crystal ball, but in the turn of the wind, in the way the fire burned." Rowena said nothing, her fear mixing with a strange, cold curiosity. "When I was a boy," Gideon continued, "just before the law hanged my father and we fled into this territory, she took my face in her hands. She told me our bloodline was cursed with violence, but that I would be the one to change it. She said my life would be a storm until the day I found my anchor." He paced the small room, his back to her. Her words, they haunt me. "A storm," she said, "will one day bring you peace. You will know her by the storm in her eyes, and she will be the key to the canyon's survival. She will be the woman you have waited a lifetime for." He turned and his eyes bored into hers. "For 20 years, I have built this place, protecting those who have no other protection. And for 20 years, I have looked into the eyes of every woman I've met, searching for that storm. I've seen blue skies, brown earth, green fields. But today," he took a step closer, "today, on that stagecoach, I looked into your eyes, Rowena Pierce, and I saw the grey, swirling, tempest-tossed sky my mother promised me." Rowena stared at him, her heart hammering. This was not a ransom. This was not lust. This was madness. He was a fanatic, a zealot who had built a cult in the wilderness, and he had just mistaken her for a human sacrifice to his mother's dying words. "You're insane," she whispered, the words trembling. "You're a deluded madman. My eyes. You kidnapped me because of the color of my eyes." "I kidnapped you," he corrected, "because you are my destiny. You are the one who will save Malachi's rest." "Save it from what?" she cried. "From the world," he said simply. "From the men who are coming to take it." He shook his head, as if clearing it. "It does not matter if you believe me. You are here, and you will stay. My mother's visions have never been wrong." He left her then, the heavy thud of the door sealing her in. Rowena sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. She was a prisoner, not of a simple outlaw, but of a prophet. He hadn't just stolen her body, he had stolen her for her soul, for a purpose she didn't understand. And as the cold desert night settled over the canyon, Rowena knew that her polite, educated fiancé, Howard Winslow, was not the kind of man who fought prophets. No one was coming for her. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Days bled into a week. Rowena existed in a state of suspended terror. She was a pariah within the community. The women in particular looked at her with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. She was the chief's woman, though Gideon never touched her, never even visited her cabin again after that first night. He merely watched. She would see him on a high ledge, staring down at her as she walked the small perimeter she was allowed. Corbett, the scarred enforcer, made his disdain clear, openly referring to her as the witch or Gideon's folly. Only Patch, the one-eyed man, showed her any kindness. He brought her books from Gideon's personal stash, Shakespeare, philosophy, geology texts. It was a library that bespoke a mind far more complex than a simple highwayman. Rowena, however, was not a damsel. Her father had taught her to observe, to think, to be resourceful. She spent her days walking, studying the routines of the guards, mapping the canyon in her mind, and her nights plotting. She would not be the anchor for this madman's storm. On the 8th night, she made her move. A supply wagon was due to leave before dawn, taking cured meats and pelts to a secret trading post. Rowena had saved her bread for 2 days. She waited until the deepest part of the night, when the moon was hidden and the guards were changing. She slipped from her cabin, keeping to the shadows, her heart a drum against her ribs. She made it to the stables, the smell of hay and horseflesh thick in the air. She had just managed to saddle a small mare when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind and an arm of steel wrapped around her waist. "Going somewhere, witch?" Corbett's voice hissed in her ear. He dragged her out of the stables and into the main square, shoving her to her knees in the dust. "Chief," he bellowed, "I found your pet trying to bolt." Lights flickered on in the surrounding cabins. People emerged, their faces sleepy, and now angry. Gideon appeared on the balcony of the main longhouse, his face a mask of thunder. He descended the stairs slowly. "I told her, Chief," Corbett said, his voice full of self-righteousness. "I told you she was poison. She's a spy. She was running." Gideon stared down at Rowena. She met his gaze, defiant, her hands bound by Corbett's rope. "Let me go," she said, her voice low and shaking with fury. "I am not your property. I am not your prophecy." Gideon's eyes were cold. "You would have died in the desert within a day." "That is my choice to make," she retorted. "No," he said. "It's not." He looked at Corbett. "Cut her loose." Corbett gaped. "Chief, she's a traitor." "She is a guest who has forgotten her manners," Gideon countered, his voice sharp. "Cut her loose, now." Seething, Corbett slashed the ropes. As Rowena scrambled to her feet, rubbing her raw wrists, the locket she always wore, the heavy silver one from her father, tumbled out from the collar of her dress. It swung, catching the moonlight. Gideon, who had been turning away, froze. He spun back, his movement so fast she flinched. He grabbed the locket, not her, his fingers closing around the metal. He stared at it, his knuckles white. "Where?" he said, his voice a deadly, quiet hiss that terrified Rowena more than his anger. "Did you get this?" It was my father's," Rowena stammered, confused by the sudden, violent shift in his demeanor. "It's all I have left of him. Please give it back." Gideon ignored her. He was staring at the locket, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. He pressed a spot Rowena had never known existed. The locket clicked and sprang open. But it wasn't a picture inside. It was a design, an insignia, etched into the silver, a winding canyon path intersected by a single stylized star. Josiah's star, Gideon breathed, his voice thick with disbelief. He looked up at her, his eyes no longer cold, but burning with a new, frantic intensity. Your father, what was his name? Leland, Rowena said, her voice small. Leland Pierce. Gideon dropped the locket as if it had burned him. He staggered back a step. The entire square was silent, watching. Leland Pierce, Gideon repeated. He looked at Patch, who had come to stand nearby. Patch, do you remember the name? From the journals? Patch's one good eye widened. The professor. The one who... My God, Gideon, it cannot be. What? Rowena demanded, her fear forgotten, replaced by a desperate need to understand. What is it? How do you know my father's name? Gideon grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. He wasn't looking at her as a woman or a prophecy. He was looking at her as a ghost. Your father wasn't just a professor, was he? He was an explorer, a map maker. Yes, she said. He was lost out here, a decade ago. A bandit raid. He wasn't lost, Gideon said, his voice raw. He was here, and it wasn't a bandit raid that took him. It was a betrayal. He pulled her toward the long house. Corbett dismissed the crowd. Patch, with me. He dragged Rowena inside, into a private study she hadn't seen. It was filled with maps and, like her cabin, books. He went to a large, locked chest and pulled out a worn, leather-bound ledger. He opened it. The first page was a drawing, a map, and in the corner, the same insignia as her locket, the canyon and the star. This place, Gideon said, his voice shaking, was not founded by me. It was founded by my grandfather, Josiah Malachi, and his partner, a visionary, an idealist, a man who believed in a self-sufficient, private society, safe from the corruption of the world. A man who mapped this entire region and designed these walls. He turned the book toward her. On the title page, in elegant, faded ink, it read, The Charter of the Phoenix Canyon Settlement by Josiah Malachi and Professor Leland Pierce. Rowena's legs gave out. She grabbed the desk to steady herself. No, my father was a teacher. He was a good man. He wasn't an outlaw. He wasn't, Gideon agreed, his voice softening. Neither was my grandfather. They were partners. They found this place, and they built it together as a sanctuary. Your locket was the key, a sign of the pact. Then, what happened? Rowena whispered. Why did he leave? Why did you become... this? They had a third partner, Gideon said, his face darkening. A man they hired as a guide and enforcer, a man who knew the territory. He was supposed to be their connection to the outside world, to bring in supplies. But he was greedy. He believed the legends of lost gold in the canyon. He wanted it all for himself. Gideon looked up, his eyes meeting hers, full of a shared, ancient pain. He murdered your father to get the maps. He tried to murder my grandfather. Josiah barely escaped, wounded, and sealed the canyon. He raised me here, in hiding, teaching me that the outside world was nothing but betrayal. This outlaw reputation? I encouraged it. It was the only thing that kept the world away. Who? Rowena asked, her blood running cold. Who was the third man? A man who was a U.S. scout at the time, Gideon said. A man who used the law as a cloak. He's a deputy marshal now. A man named Wallace Hume. Rowena's world tilted. Wallace Hume. The name was like a key turning a lock in the darkest part of her memory. She remembered him. Not as a name, but as a face. A man with pale eyes and a distinctive white scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He had come to their home in St. Louis after. He had delivered her father's effects. A ruined satchel. A broken compass. He had been polite, his voice dripping with false sympathy, as he explained how savages had attacked the expedition. Rowena had been 12. She had hated him on sight. Now she knew why. "He's the one," she said, her voice barely audible. "He came to our house. He brought us my father's things. He lied to my mother's face." Gideon nodded grimly. "And he's been trying to find this canyon ever since. He knows the general area, but your father's maps were the only true guide. He thinks the gold is still here, and now he's a deputy marshal, with the power of the government behind him." A terrible realization dawned on Rowena. "My fiancé, Howard Winslow. He's in Prescott. He will have reported my kidnapping to the law." Gideon's expression went flat. "To Deputy Marshal Wallace Hume, the most powerful lawman in the region." "He's not coming to rescue me," Rowena said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. "Hume will use this. A captured woman. A den of outlaws. It's the excuse he's been waiting for. He'll come here, not with a posse, but with an army. He won't try to rescue me. He'll wipe this place out, and me with it, to silence the last person with the name Pierce." "Exactly," Gideon said. He was no longer the fanatic. He was a general facing a war. He's been probing our defenses for months, sending in spies, but he's never had a reason to rally the full support of the territorial government. Your capture, you've given it to him. The prophecy. She will be the key to the canyon's survival." Gideon's mother hadn't been wrong, just misunderstood. Rowena wasn't a prize. She was the catalyst. She was the one who had inadvertently brought their shared enemy to the gates. "Patch," Gideon ordered, his voice sharp. "Double the watch at every post. Send riders to the high bluffs. I want to know the second a dust cloud bigger than 10 men appears. Corbett," the scarred man, who had been listening from the doorway, his face ashen, stepped inside. "Chief." "You were right," Gideon said. "She is poison. She's the poison that's going to draw the snake out of his hole. Prepare the defenses. Every man, every woman. We arm them all." Corbett looked at Rowena, his expression shifting from hatred to a grudging, fearful respect. "Yes, Chief." He scurried out. Rowena's mind was racing. "He thinks I'm just a captive, a helpless woman. He doesn't know that I know who he is. He doesn't know—" She stopped. "What?" Gideon prompted. "My father," Rowena said, thinking fast. "He was meticulous. He sent me his journals right before his last expedition. He told me to keep them safe, that they were just geology notes, but that they held the maps to his heart. I thought he was being sentimental. I have them. They're in my trunk, in Prescott, with Howard. Hume will get his hands on them," Gideon said, his face grim. "No," Rowena said. "Howard is a banker. He's weak, but he's precise. He would have put my trunks in storage at the Prescott Bank, not at the hotel. And Hume doesn't know they exist. He thinks the maps died with my father." She looked at Gideon, her eyes, the storm-tossed eyes he had seen, now flashing with a cold, clear light. "Those journals aren't just geology. They are my father's legacy. They are the complete maps, the charters, the proof of his partnership. And—" She walked to the large map on Gideon's wall. "My father was a brilliant engineer. He wasn't just a partner, he was the architect. He would have built in defenses, secret passages, escape routes." Gideon and Patch stared at her. "You're a prisoner, Rowena Pierce," Gideon said, a new, dangerous understanding in his voice. a prisoner with an arranged marriage waiting for you." "I am the daughter of Leland Pierce," Rowena corrected, her voice steel. "And this man, Wallace Hume, murdered my father and built his career on that lie. He is coming here to finish the job, to destroy my father's legacy and all of you with it." She looked at Gideon Malachi, the outlaw chief, the man who had stolen her. "Your prophecy was wrong. I'm not here to save you. I'm here for revenge." The air in Malachi's rest changed. The suspicion aimed at Rowena curdled into a shared, focused fear. She was no longer Gideon's folly. She was the Pierce woman, the living ghost of their founder and the harbinger of their doom. "We can't get the journals," Gideon stated, his hands flat on the table in his study. He, Rowena, and Patch were their command council. "Sending a man to Prescott is suicide. Hume will have the town locked down. He'll be watching the bank, the hotel, everything." "I don't need the journals," Rowena said. Gideon looked up. "What?" "I've read them," she said, her voice quiet. "My father and I, we were very close. After he was lost, I read those journals every night for a year. I memorized them. I thought they were just his way of teaching me geology from afar. The aquifers of the high desert, the fault lines of the red canyons, the unstable shale formations. I can recite them, chapter and verse. I never understood what I was reading." She walked to the map on the wall. "He wasn't talking about geology. He was talking about engineering." She placed her finger on a spot on the map, a solid wall of rock at the north end of the canyon. "He called this the Great Aquifer. He wrote that even in the driest season, the Great Aquifer holds its water." "Patch, is there a spring there?" Patch's eye widened. How did you know? It's the source of our water. It comes from deep in the rock." "It's not just a spring," Rowena said. "It's a tunnel. My father designed it as a pressure release valve for the settlement, a way to get the women and children out. It leads 5 miles north into the next valley. It's the main escape route." Gideon stared at her, his expression one of awe. "My grandfather told me the legends. He said the professor had built secrets into the stone, but he died before he could tell me where." "And here," Rowena said, moving her finger, "the west wall, unstable shale formations. My father wrote, a single, well-placed tap is all it would take to bring the mountain down. It's not a defense, it's a trap. He built a way to seal the canyon, permanently." "But Hume's men will come from the south," Gideon said, "down the main approach. It's the only way in for a large force." "Exactly," Rowena said, "and we'll let them." For the next 3 days, Malachi's rest was transformed. Under Rowena's direction, guided by the memories of her father's geology notes, Gideon's men, including a now subservient Corbett, went to work. They weren't just outlaws, they were miners, masons, and engineers. They cleared the aquifer tunnel, which was exactly where Rowena said it would be, hidden behind a false rock wall in the main cistern. They also followed her instructions to the west wall, planting the few sticks of dynamite they had, left over from their mining operations. Rowena worked alongside them. She taught the women how to load and fire rifles. She organized the supplies, setting aside what was needed for the evacuation. She was no longer a captive. She was their leader. On the 3rd evening, Gideon found her on the high bluff, the same one where he used to watch her. She was staring south, a rifle in her hands, her father's locket tucked securely inside her shirt. "You are not the woman who was on that stagecoach," he said, his voice quiet. "You're wrong," Rowena replied, not looking at him. I am exactly that woman. I just didn't have a reason to fight. Now I do. You fight for your father's memory. Yes, she said, and for vengeance. Yes. He stood beside her. The canyon spread out below them, their home, their sanctuary. And for this place? For us? Rowena finally turned to him. His face, in the twilight, was no longer just the hard mask of the outlaw. It was the face of a man who had carried the weight of his people, his grandfather's legacy, and his mother's prophecy, all on his own. He looked lonely. My father, Rowena said softly, believed in this place. He believed in a sanctuary. He was betrayed. You were raised on that betrayal. You let it define you, Gideon. You became the outlaw the world expected you to be. You used your grandfather's sanctuary as a fortress to hide in. My father didn't build a fortress. He built a home. She touched the cold rock of the canyon wall. I'm not here for vengeance, not just. I'm here for justice, for my father, for your grandfather. Wallace Hume isn't just coming to kill you. He's coming to kill them, to erase their dream. I won't let him. Gideon looked at her, and for the first time he saw her. He wasn't seeing a prophecy, or a storm, or the daughter of his grandfather's partner. He was seeing Rowena Pierce, and he finally understood what his mother meant. She wasn't an anchor to stop his storm. She was the storm, a force that had come not to bring him peace, but to scour his world clean and force him to be the man he was meant to be. He's coming, Gideon said, pointing. Rowena looked, far to the south, just as the sun dipped below the horizon. She saw it, a single, bloody reflection. Not a dust cloud. Hume was too smart for that. It was the glint of sunlight off a field glass, high on the opposite ridge. The vulture had arrived. He'll wait for morning, Gideon said. He'll attack at dawn. Good, Rowena said, checking the action on her rifle. Let him come. We'll be waiting. Dawn broke cold and sharp. The alarm came not as a shout, but as a single, echoing rifle shot from the southern watchtower. They were here. Get the women and children to the tunnel, Gideon commanded. Patch, you lead them. Go to the rendezvous point and wait. If we are not there by nightfall, you ride north. Do not stop until you reach Oregon. Gideon, Patch said, his one eye filled with sorrow, I will not leave you. You will, Gideon said, clasping his arm. That is an order. They need a leader. Go. Patch looked at Rowena. Miss Pierce, it has been an honor. He tipped his hat and began to herd the terrified non-combatants toward the cistern. Rowena stayed. She stood on the command balcony with Gideon, Corbett, and the 20 men who remained. They looked down the narrow canyon pass. They're coming in slow, Corbett muttered, his knuckles white on his rifle. He's testing us. Rowena could see them now, not a rag-tag posse. This was a private army, 30, maybe 40 men, heavily armed, wearing the tan dusters of railroad mercenaries, and at their head, riding a fine bay gelding, was Deputy Marshal Wallace Hume. He looked confident, righteous, and utterly corrupt. He's splitting his men, Gideon noted. He's sending a force to scale the east wall. Fools. It's a sheer drop. He's trying to flank us, Rowena said. He expects us to be holed up, cowering. He doesn't know we're letting him in. Hume's main force, about 25 men, began to ride into the canyon proper. They stopped just out of rifle range. Hume cupped his hands. Gideon Malachi, his voice echoed, oily and self-assured. You are harboring a wanted criminal and a known kidnapper. I am here in the name of the law. Send out the woman, Rowena Pierce, and surrender yourselves. He's a good liar, Gideon grunted. Let me answer him, Rowena said. She stepped forward, ignoring Gideon's protective instinct to pull her back. "Marshal Hume!" she shouted, her voice clear and carrying in the morning air. Hume visibly startled. He hadn't expected to see her or hear her. "Miss Pierce, thank God. We are here to rescue you. Stay down, we are coming in." "Are you Marshal?" Rowena called back. "Are you here to rescue me, just like you rescued my father, Leland Pierce, 10 years ago?" The canyon went dead silent. Hume's horse shifted. He hadn't expected this. "I don't know what you're talking about, girl," he bellowed. "You've been brainwashed by that killer." "You have a scar," Rowena shouted, her voice ringing with the power of truth. "Above your left eyebrow. I remember it from when you came to our home, holding my father's broken compass. You are a murderer, a thief, and a liar, and today you will answer for your crimes." Hume's face, even from a distance, was a mask of pure rage. The pretense was over. "Kill them all!" he screamed to his men. "Leave no one alive! Burn the whole place!" The mercenaries charged, rifles blazing. "Now!" Gideon roared. The first volley from the defenders cut down the front line of riders. Horses screamed. Men fell, but more kept coming. They were using the rocks for cover, advancing steadily. "They're too many," Corbett said, reloading. "They're at the marker," Rowena said, her eyes on the pass. "Gideon, now." Gideon raised his rifle and fired a single shot toward the west wall. It was the signal. A moment later, a deafening explosion ripped the air. Rowena's unstable shale formation did its job. Thousands of tons of rock and stone tore loose from the canyon wall. It wasn't just a rock slide, it was an avalanche. It came down with the sound of a roaring god, completely sealing the southern entrance to the canyon. It buried half of Hume's attacking force. The canyon, which had been their entrance, was now their tomb. Hume, who had been at the rear, was safe, but he was trapped outside. His men inside were cut off. It worked, Gideon breathed, staring at the massive wall of rubble. But their victory was short-lived. A shout from the east tower. "They're up! The flanking team! They're on the ridge!" Hume's other men, the ones he'd sent to flank, had found a goat path. They were above the town, on the east rim, raining down fire from above. "Corbett, take 10 men! Hold the longhouse!" Gideon yelled. "The rest with me! We have to clear that ridge!" It was a brutal, close-quarters fight. They scrambled up the stairs, carved into the rock, firing at the mercenaries above. Bullets pinged off the stone around Rowena. She moved with Gideon, reloading as he fired. They were a single, deadly unit. They reached the top, a narrow ledge. Corbett and his men were pinned down below. 3 mercenaries were dug in behind a rock. "I'll draw their fire," Gideon said. "No," Corbett's voice came from below. He was scrambling up, a lit stick of dynamite in his hand. He had been shot, his chest a bloody mess. She's one of us, Chief. She's a founder." He looked at Rowena. "Your father would be proud." Before Gideon or Rowena could stop him, Corbett charged the mercenary position. He threw the dynamite and his body at the rocks. The explosion was contained, but absolute. It cleared the nest. But Corbett was gone. He saved us," Rowena whispered, horrified. "He saved the canyon," Gideon said grimly. He pulled her to her feet. "It's not over." They looked down. The remaining mercenaries, maybe 10 of them, were trapped. Their leader, Hume, was on the other side of a 100-foot wall of rock. Their flanking team was dead. They were surrendering, throwing down their guns. It was over. They had won. Gideon let out a roar, not of triumph, but of grief and relief. He pulled Rowena into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You did it, Rowena. You saved us." A single, sharp crack echoed through the canyon. Gideon stiffened. He made a sound, a choked gasp. He pushed Rowena away. "Gideon?" she asked. He looked down. A dark, flowering stain was spreading across his chest. He looked up, past her, at the west wall. On the other side of the canyon, on the opposite rim, a lone figure stood. He was reloading a buffalo rifle. He was too far away to have come with the main force. It was Howard Winslow, Rowena's fiancé. He had not been in Prescott, waiting. He had been with Hume all along. "No," Rowena whispered. Gideon collapsed to his knees. "The prophecy," he choked, a bloody smile on his lips. "My mother, she always did, like a twist." He fell forward into the dust as Howard Winslow, his face a pale dot of triumph from across the canyon, raised his rifle for another shot. Rowena's world narrowed to the man on the ridge. Howard, her weak, precise, banker fiancé. The man who was supposed to be her safe, respectable future. He hadn't been a victim, waiting in Prescott. He had been a partner. Hume must have offered him a cut. The land, the gold, the railroad contracts. Howard, with his Eastern money and connections, would have been the perfect, legitimate face for Hume's stolen empire. And she, Rowena, was the loose end. He wasn't just killing an outlaw, he was erasing his fiancée, the last link to Leland Pierce. There was no time for grief, no time for shock. As Howard raised his rifle, sighting her, Rowena did the only thing she could. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She grabbed Gideon's fallen revolver from his holster. It was heavy, unfamiliar. The distance was impossible, at least 400 yards, across a chasm. "My father," she whispered, her voice a prayer to the man who had taught her physics and geometry, said the shortest distance is a straight line. She didn't aim for Howard. She aimed above him, at the unstable shale formation her father had marked in his journal, a section of cliff just above where Howard stood, that she had noted but hadn't had the explosives to use. She cocked the hammer, her hand shaking. Howard was settling his aim. "For my father," she said. She fired. The bullet, by sheer, impossible luck, or by the hand of destiny, struck the rock. It was the single, well-placed tap her father had written about. At first, nothing. Howard flinched at the sound of the shot, confused. Then, a rumble, a cracking sound. The ledge on which Howard Winslow stood, the ledge that had been stable for 1,000 years, shivered. With a groan that echoed through the canyon, it broke free. Howard had just enough time to look up, his face a mask of pale, incomprehensible terror. He didn't scream. He and the tons of rock he stood on simply fell, disappearing into the canyon depths below. Silence. Rowena dropped the gun. She scrambled to Gideon, her hands fumbling for the wound. It was high, in the shoulder. Bad, but maybe not fatal. "Gideon," she said, ripping a strip from her skirt to make a pressure bandage. "Gideon, stay with me." His eyes fluttered open. He looked past her, at the empty ridge. He's gone," Rowena said, her voice hard. "All of them. They're all gone." "Good," Gideon whispered. He coughed, blood at the corner of his mouth. "Patch. The others. I'll get them," she said. She put her head to his chest. His heart was still beating, a strong, steady thump under her ear. He was alive. She stood. The battle was over. The canyon was theirs. She looked at the wall of rubble that had saved them. She looked at the body of Corbett. She looked at the surrendering, terrified mercenaries. She was Rowena Pierce, daughter of the architect and chief of the canyon. She raised her face to the sky and screamed, a long, raw, animal sound of grief, fury, and finally, release. A new sound answered her. Not an echo, Hoofbeats, from the north, from the direction of the escape tunnel. Patch! He was riding back, and he wasn't alone. He was riding with a man in a blue uniform, a captain in the United States Cavalry. Patch had not fled. He had used the tunnel, as ordered. But he hadn't gone north to Oregon. He had ridden to Fort Grant, to the real law. He had carried a message, one Rowena had penned days earlier, along with her father's original charter, which she'd found in Gideon's chest. As the cavalry captain rode into the shattered, smoking town, he looked at the rubble, the dead mercenaries, and the woman covered in blood and dust, standing over the wounded outlaw chief. "Ma'am," the captain said, his voice rough with disbelief. "We received a message about a Marshal Hume and an illegal army. It seems—" He looked at the chaos. "It seems we arrived late." "You're just in time, Captain," Rowena said, pointing to the surrendering mercenaries. "You're just in time to take out the trash." 1 month later, the canyon looked different. The name Malachi's Rest, with its outlaw connotations, was gone. A new, hand-carved wooden sign stood at the rebuilt and now open southern gate. It read, "Pierce's Canyon, ESTGs 1872. The U.S. government, faced with the damning evidence of Hume's corruption, the testimony of his own captured mercenaries, and the original legally filed charter from Leland Pierce and Josiah Malachi, had no choice. They had recognized the town's charter. Pierce's Canyon was, officially, a legitimate settlement. Gideon Malachi, his arm in a sling, his chest heavily bandaged, stood on the balcony of the longhouse, looking down at the town. His town. Their town. He was no longer Gideon Malachi, outlaw chief. Thanks to Rowena's testimony and his actions in defending the canyon against Hume's illegal army, he had been given a full pardon. He was just Gideon. He heard a step behind him. Rowena. She carried a tray with coffee and a bowl of broth. She had, in the past month, become a general, a nurse, and a statesman. "You should be in bed," she said, her voice soft. "I've been in bed for a month," he grumbled, though he took the coffee with a grateful smile. "I'm tired of it." They stood in silence, watching the town rebuild. The captured mercenaries, now federal prisoners, were clearing the last of the rubble from the rock slide under the watchful eyes of cavalry troopers. "The captain is leaving tomorrow," Rowena said. "He offered me an escort. Back east. Or to Prescott." Gideon's hand tightened on his coffee mug. He said nothing. He had known this was coming. The world was open to her now. Her father's name was cleared. His legacy was secure. She had no reason to stay here, in this harsh, wild place, with a man who had, after all, kidnapped her. "Howard's affairs are a mess," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "It seems he and Hume were partners in several land-grabbing schemes for the railroad. The bank in Prescott is ruined, my family back east. They lost everything he'd invested." "So you have nothing," Gideon said, turning to her. "Oh no," Rowena said, meeting his gaze. "I have a town. I have a charter. I have a silver locket, and a canyon full of people who need a leader." Gideon's heart ached. "I am not the man your father was, Rowena. I'm not a professor. I'm a brawler, a man who has lived by the gun." "Good," Rowena said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Because I am an architect. I need a brawler. I need a partner who knows how to build, how to protect, and how to fight. This place, it's just getting started. It's going to be a hard life." Gideon finally understood. His mother's prophecy. It was never about him finding a woman. It was about him being found. "A storm," he whispered, "to bring me peace." "No," Rowena said, setting down her tray and taking his hand. A storm to clear the air. She stood on her toes and kissed him. It was not the kiss of a captive or the kiss of a prophet. It was the kiss of a partner. Gideon Malachi had been captured by the outlaw chief's daughter. He had been captured by the woman he'd waited a lifetime for, and for the first time in his life, he was truly free. The story of Rowena Pierce and Gideon Malachi reminds us that destiny isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we are forced to fight for. Rowena was stolen from her life, but in that harsh, unforgiving canyon, she didn't just find a prisoner's fate. She found her true strength. She found the truth of her father's legacy, and a love born from grit and survival. Theirs is a story of how the deepest betrayals can lead to the strongest alliances, and how sometimes the only way to find your future is to have your entire world torn apart first. Thank you for joining us for this incredible, real-life drama. If this story of justice and unexpected love moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a story of true resilience, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the dramatic tales we have coming up next.